Who are some of the worst romance scammers? Let's start it right off with number 8. Kevin Can't Wait. A group of romance fraudsters deceived their victims into thinking they were in love, then defrauded them of $305,000. The scammers used multiple dating sites and hid behind the fake personas of Kevin Thompson or Kevin Churchill. They preyed upon women and posed as wealthy businessmen who led jet-setting lifestyles. Once they established relationships with their victims, the scammers asked for money for legal fees, travel costs, veterinary bills, and more. British police worked with a company called Scamalytics, which sounds like some early 90s rap group that tours schools to teach about scams, to track the con artists. Scamalytics has created a global blacklist of scammers. Users can fill out an online form where they enter the names, images, and profile details of anyone they suspect to be a romance scammer. The organization analyzes the information they receive and searches for other fake profiles by the same criminals. Once they have this information, they can petition to have the accounts taken down. Kevin convinced victims he was in love with them by spamming them with loving messages where he told victims how important they were to him. Flattered by the attention, these women believed they were in a relationship. Sharon Turner, one of Kevin's victims, thought she was falling for a man that ran a company selling medical equipment worldwide. His job meant he traveled regularly, but suddenly he was running low on funds. He told Sharon that his dog had been staying in kennels while he traveled and had gotten injured. But Kevin couldn't transfer money as he banked with the premier bank Coots. So Sharon transferred the money, and despite not paying her back, the pair kept talking. Then, a few months later, Kevin needed money again. This time, the cash was needed for transport and legal fees while Kevin was in Haiti. So Sharon dipped into her savings to send him the money. Eventually, Sharon began to grow suspicious of Kevin. To probe, she asked him about details like his dog's name to see if his story changed. But Kevin had his story straight. Another few months passed before Kevin had an even bigger favor. He was working with a politician in Haiti who would meet Kevin in Brussels to pay back the money he was owed. Since he was still traveling for work, he wanted Sharon to go to his place. He told Sharon to grab a thank you card and $2,500 as a thank you gift for a friend. Sharon decided to fulfill the request, hopeful she would get her money back. When she arrived in Belgium, 2 well-dressed men greeted her on the other side. She handed over the thank you gift and returned to the UK, expecting her money to come through at any minute. But it never happened, and Kevin kept asking for more money. Stuck in a deep hole that she couldn't see her way out of, she feared he would never repay her if she broke off contact. Ultimately, Turner lost $250,000 to the scam, which severely affected her mental health. Investigators traced the scam to a group of men in the UK who made $500,000 from their operation. They used the money to invest in property, dine at high-end restaurants, and enjoy a luxury lifestyle. By the time investigators tracked down and arrested the group, the scammers had spent most of the money. They were charged and found guilty of fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering. Each member received 21 months in jail. Number 7. True Lies. Mark Acklom posed as a millionaire, Swiss banker, and MI6 spy to con a mother of 2 out of her life savings. Carolyn Woods met Acklom in 2012. Acklom entered the boutique Woods managed to buy a jacket. He told her he was a Swiss banker visiting the country to buy an Airfield. Carolyn was not the first of the con artist victims, whose actions earned him a spot on the Crime Stoppers Most Wanted list. When Carolyn met him, she enjoyed being single and living in a rental property in Bath, England. Carol had $1 million in savings, some of which she intended to use to buy a home. Then she fell for Acklom, who she knew as Mark Conway, and was sure their relationship would last. Within a few days of meeting, they moved in together. Acklom was charming, flirtatious, and made her laugh. Woods thought he was working for the Prince's Trust and helping fundraise for various charitable organizations. Acklom had also convinced her he was an MI6 agent. On one occasion, Acklom's boss called him while they were on a trip to London, so he drove Carolyn to the MI6 building where he supposedly worked. She watched watched him from the car as he entered the parking lot past security with no reason to believe he was lying. Carolyn found life more exciting with Acklom in it and proposed to him. While she planned her wedding, spending $7,600 on a dress, Acklom asked for money. He requested multiple loans in incremental amounts ranging from $40,000 to $152,000. Acklom told her he needed the funds for various renovation projects on his properties. Instead, he bought flashy cars like Maseratis, Porsche, and BMWs, ate at Michelin-starred restaurants, and traveled first class. The couple's year-long relationship ended when Acklom fled the country and cut off all communication with Woods. Investigators believed he was at large in Spain and issued a European arrest warrant. In May 2017, Acklom was seen in Geneva, Switzerland with his family. British officers worked with Swiss law enforcement to extradite Acklom to the UK. At the time of his arrest, he was living in a luxury Zurich apartment with his wife and children. His arrest ended 30 years of fraud. At 16, Acklom stole his father's gold Amex card, which he used to hire jets to fly his friends around Europe while posing as a stockbroker. As a teen, he convinced a building society to give him $635,000 mortgage to buy a small mansion in London. By the time of his extradition, he had already served 3 prison sentences in Spain for multiple fraud offenses, such as deceiving people into buying properties he pretended to own in London. Acklom's actions severely affected Woods' mental health. She sought treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder due to Acklom's con. Acklom received a 5-year and 8-month prison sentence. The judge counted the 237 days Acklom spent in custody waiting trial toward his sentence. Number 6. Cash Strat. A romance scammer convinced Ruth Robertson to travel from Australia to Malaysia with $200,000 strapped to her body and swindled her out of $25,000. Ruth met a handsome construction engineer on the dating site b2.com.au and believed she'd found love after her 25-year marriage ended. The man introduced himself as Jeff Thomas and called or emailed her daily. Despite never meeting in person, he shared every detail of his life with her. From his pictures, Ruth thought he was a handsome, wealthy entrepreneur. They communicated daily and spoke via Skype, but whenever she tried to see him on camera, he claimed to experience technical issues. Thomas always had a reason they couldn't meet in person, and if Ruth pushed it too hard, he'd get angry, accusing her of disrespecting him and being impatient. Their relationship was less than a month old when the money request started. Thomas needed cash after someone stole his credit card and funds to finish a construction project in Malaysia. At her request, he sent copies of awards he won, a copy of his passport, and photos of the bridge Thomas was constructing in Malaysia to prove he was real. His accountant even called her to verify his identity. He asked her to hand over the deed of her humble cottage, which she thought was crazy but obliged since Thomas seemed legitimate. He also informed her that he owned units in Point Piper, one of Sydney's most exclusive suburbs. Ruth repeatedly sent him money, but his last request helped her realize she was the victim of a scam. He needed her to travel to Kuala Lumpur with $200,000 strapped to her body. The money was to complete the railway bridge, but Ruth refused. She joked about how ridiculous her petite body would look if that much cash was strapped to it. As a former air hostess, she knew the potential punishment she could face if she did it. The idea was just too weird. It made her realize she was the victim of a scam. Ruth did some digging and found that her photographs of Thomas were stolen from the internet, and the real man in the photos had no idea that fraudsters used his image to lure victims. Ruth was one of thousands of Australians that have fallen victim to romance scams and lost $25,000 to a fake Jeff Thomas. Number 5. Oh, Captain, my Captain. Scammers stole a Danish sea captain's pictures to defraud an Australian woman out of thousands of dollars. The con artist, posing as Captain Thomas Steve, contacted a woman named Faye on Instagram. The pair seemed to have a close connection, and their conversations moved to Google Hangouts. Captain Steve claimed he needed money for his daughter's school activities and birthday celebrations, and Faye was glad to help. He then tricked her into transferring over $9,000 so she could receive some jewelry he claimed he sent her through Westline delivery. When Faye realized she was being scammed by the man she thought she loved, she was crushed. Another person affected by the scam was Captain Thomas Lindegard Madsen. Madsen likes men and is married to one, and he's the real man behind the images of Captain Thomas Steve. Captain Madsen's pictures are some of the most frequently used in romance scams, obviously without his knowledge or consent. As the face of many scams, Madsen is regularly bombarded with messages from people thinking he was the person they had been talking to. Being a good guy, he used to try and respond to all of them, but after constantly getting flooded, it just wasn't possible. So Captain Madsen finally had to post a warning on his Facebook page. In it, he explained who he was and encouraged women to demand a video chat with strangers they meet online and to never send money. Unfortunately, it still probably won't be enough. Number 4. License to Thrill. Roxanne Reed heartlessly plotted to end her elderly mother's life so she had more money to send her online boyfriend. Reed shared a small house with her mother and was dealing with financial problems. Unaware she was the victim of a romance scam, Reed repeatedly sent money to the scammer she thought she was dating. And seeing an opportunity, the scammer asked for more and more money. Reed had filed for bankruptcy in 2017, which listed her debt as $30,000 from credit card purchases and a personal loan. Her income consisted of Social Security and workers' compensation as she was unemployed, so her coffers weren't exactly overflowing. Relatives contacted local police to discuss their concerns about someone using a fake identity to manipulate Reed. During their investigation, law enforcement discovered a series of texts to the scammer detailing her plans to end her mother's life. Investigators struggled to determine the scammer's location and identity, but discovered that the fraudster used the identity of a Texas business owner and physical therapist. The man's likeness was used in multiple online scams without his knowledge. It was also unclear how her mother's passing was going to result in Reed getting her hands on more cash. Once authorities found out, police arrested and charged her. Number 3. Come sail away. A catfish conned a woman known only as Lisa out of thousands of dollars by posing as a Royal Navy sailor with a sick daughter. Lisa signed up for an online dating website after her husband left her. She was matched with Rob, a Royal Navy sailor stationed in the Middle East. Although Lisa lived in the south of England, the pair shared an instant connection and started a long-distance relationship. Rob was affectionate and attentive. Lisa awoke to poems he'd written her, and the two communicated frequently throughout the day. A few months into their relationship, Rob asked her to send him money after his bank account was hacked. Lisa wasn't going for it and rejected the request right off the bat. But then Rob said the cash was for his sick daughter who needed an expensive surgery. The emotional blackmail continued as Rob sent messages about how without the surgery, his daughter would lose her life. Lisa initially sent $6,300 but kept sending money over the following months. When Lisa's stepson found out she was talking to someone in the Royal Navy, he told her not to send Rob any money. Unfortunately, Lisa didn't listen. After Lisa confided in a friend about the situation, the friend contacted the police. Lisa gave an officer the photos that Rob sent her, and the officer quickly tracked down the images to a Facebook profile under a different name. By the time she realized that Rob had defrauded her, she'd sent him almost $80,000. Lisa ended up losing her life savings and more to the scam. Number 2. Match.com. British mother of 3, Maria Beckwith, lost $7,600 to a con artist she met on Match.com. Maria matched with David Mills on the popular dating site. Mills presented himself as a Canadian citizen who worked as a building contractor and lived in London. Maria lived in northern England, but the distance didn't stop them from communicating daily. They constantly sent romantic texts and video chatted every night before bed. The pair spoke for hours and exchanged pictures of themselves with their children. They had finally agreed to meet in person when Mills suddenly got stuck on a surprise work trip to South Africa, effectively foiling their plan. While he was in South Africa, Mills claimed something bad had happened at work and that he was being blamed for it. He said he now faced legal issues and couldn't leave. So he asked Maria for money, needing her to send over everything she had so he could come home. Mills insisted that she take out loans or borrow cash from friends to transfer the funds to his account. Desperate for them to be together, Maria sent $7,600. Mills sent her a picture of an $800,000 paycheck and promised that when his project finished, he would pay her back, and they would buy a house in the countryside. But then he said he wasn't coming home, and Maria realized that she'd been scammed. She called the Canadian embassy, which confirmed that she was the victim of an online romance fraud and that David Mills did not exist. Mills had used sophisticated software to put someone else's face over his during their nightly video calls, and of course, he photoshopped his pictures. Since Maria had willingly transferred the funds to Mills, she was unable to retrieve any money she'd lost in the scam. The police put her in touch with Action Fraud UK, an organization supporting victims of romance scams, but they say the scammers weren't likely to ever be caught. If you're enjoying this video, definitely stay right on this video to find out how this romance scammer had so many sugar mamas. Number 1. An icy favor. Romance scammers deceived Australian grandmother Maria Elvira Pinto Exposto into smuggling illegal substances into Malaysia. Exposto was on her way to marry the love of her life, Captain Daniel Smith, a U.S. Army officer she had been in a relationship for 2 years. Captain Smith had swept Maria off of her feet. The handsome U.S. officer gave her the attention she wasn't getting at home, and in Exposto's eyes, they shared a deep connection. They communicated multiple times daily, and Smith regularly sent her pictures pictures of himself and love poems, as well as singing to her. Smith finally asked her to marry him in September 2013, but there was an issue and he needed a favor. Smith needed Maria to deliver his discharge papers so they could get married. He explained that he needed Maria to pick up his discharge papers in Shanghai and take them to the US Embassy in Australia. So Maria flew to Shanghai to pick up a bag she thought contained her fiance's clothing and papers. With the bag in tow, she boarded a flight to Malaysia where she had a layover. She had no idea what hid inside the bag's lining. Although she was a transfer passenger, Maria mistakenly went through immigration at Kuala Lumpur Airport. When Malaysian customs officers told her they found ice in her bag, she told them that wasn't possible. There was no ice, and if there was, it would have already melted. But the Border Patrol had actually discovered controlled substances known as ice stuffed in the bag's lining and arrested her. So Maria entered Malaysian custody, facing charges for trafficking. The first judge was sympathetic to her case, believing that she's naive and innocent, not a criminal. So she was acquitted, but things are never that easy. It was clear that the grandmother was clueless about the contraband trade, but prosecutors weirdly argued that her ignorance was not a defense. So Malaysia's Court of Appeal found her guilty of smuggling, and she faced the mandatory death penalty associated with the crime. Since there was evidence that Maria genuinely had no idea what she was doing when she arrived in Kuala Lumpur, her lawyer filed an appeal to the federal court in Malaysia as her final legal resort. Maria thankfully won her appeal against her sentence for trafficking, but had spent 5 years in jail and 18 months on death row during the lengthy legal proceedings. Between January 2016 and September of 2019, Rubin Sarpong and his squad worked together to scam women in New Jersey and the surrounding area on online dating apps. His accomplices lived in Ghana while he lived in the US. What he and the team would do is set up fake dating profiles all over the place on various dating websites such as Plenty of Fish, OkCupid, and Tinder. Sarpong would routinely hit up women on online dating sites looking for romance. Whatever platform you could think of, he was on there messaging women. He would message and quickly sweet-talk women looking for love. But then, he'd quickly turn the conversation into a promise of getting rich. It goes without saying that they would always use a fake person identity. Sometimes they'd go through the trouble of making fake IDs as well. They also had to set up numerous email addresses, numerous phone numbers, and numerous bank accounts, and most of the time, they posed as US military personnel stationed overseas. But why the military? Simply put, it's because of the fact that being in the military just makes things much easier for scammers in general. It's actually quite smart for the scammers. The fact that military personnel are stationed outside the US makes it easy for scammers to make up excuses why they don't have something a normal person would have when someone asks them questions. They can just blame everything on the fact that they're overseas in the military. Plus, there's the whole secrecy thing they can play up with the government at play. Hundreds of times a day, women all over the world are being conned by scammers posing as US service members. This is according to Chris Gray from the US Army Criminal Investigation Command. They literally get hundreds of calls a day about dating scams. Most of the victims are women in the US. They mostly range from their late 30s to late 70s. You'd think that it would be someone who's dumb and uneducated. Nope. Gray says that education doesn't matter. Plenty of highly educated people get scammed as well. According to Gray, there's one easy step to avoid getting scammed by a military imposter. Just ask to be sent an email from his or her military account ending in .mil. Gray says the scammers will do everything they can to get around this email check. They'll quickly just make up another lie, such as saying they're on a top secret mission. Hotspots for online romance scams include Nigeria and other countries in West Africa. But today, there's only a small number of personnel in the West African region. For example, fewer than 50 military and civilian employees and contractors are in Nigeria. After Sarpong establishes some virtual sparks with the women, this is when the real work starts. He starts asking them for help in the form of money. For Sarpong, gold was always involved. Sarpong would make up that money was needed for the purpose of paying to get gold bars into the US. The stories that Sarpong and his team use aren't the same every time. They tailor it for each woman. Most of the time, Sarpong would claim to be a soldier stationed in Syria. He'd say he either received, found, or was awarded gold bars. He's now rich, but he had a problem. He didn't have enough cash on hand to ship the gold bars himself. There were taxes to be paid, shipping fees, and other fake invoices that needed to be paid in order to get the gold to the US. He'd tell the women that their money would be returned once the gold bars were back to the States, and of course, they'd get a lot more money back for their efforts. Let's get into some details with the scam. One unidentified and unfortunate lady we'll call scammed victim number 1 went back and forth with Sarpong. He told her that he was stationed in Syria and his unit had received millions of dollars worth of gold bars. He told this lady that he was given one of the boxes of gold and that box was worth $12 million. Why do people fall for this? Has anyone heard of the military ever giving away gold bars to soldiers? Anyways, Sarpong started asking her if she could help him get the bars back to the US once he knew she was hooked. And this is where Sarpong usually has the ladies talk to one of his team members just so they could build some trust in the ladies' minds. In this specific instance, someone on his squad posed as a diplomat named Alwyn Rolf Liss. He was supposed to help Sarpong with the transfer of the gold back to the US. The fake diplomat would have the perfect answer for every one of her questions. How come Liss didn't have his own US bank account? Because he wasn't a US citizen. So he had the victim wire her money to his secretary's bank account. He told her this was the account he used whenever he arranged gold deliveries for people. Of course, that bank account actually belonged to Sarpong. Even after the victim wired the money over, they would keep talking to her. Why would they do this? If they found someone who would send money one time, why wouldn't they send money a second time, or a third time, or maybe a fourth time? The money just keeps coming until the women realize they're getting scammed. Basically, they're going for max value per scam here. A few days later, fake diplomat Liss told victim number 1 the good news. He would be flying from Syria to New York and then to Maryland with the gold. He emailed a copy of a fake airway bill that showed the 2 trunks with the quote, family treasure that were being shipped to her. The fake airway bill had her address on it. They really tried to make it seem like she was getting the gold. He was listed as the delivery agent, but there was one problem. There would be extra costs. Liss also attached a copy of a fake United Nations identity card that showed that he was an Israeli citizen and an official delivery agent for the UN. Also, he told her, that way she would recognize him when she picked him up at the airport. From approximately May 22, 2018 to June 12, 2018, Sarpong and his scam team successfully scammed almost $94,000 from this particular lady running this usual military play. But Sarpong didn't always go after women. And he didn't always use the military. He went after at least one man. Sarpong pretended to be a lady who was living in Florida in one instance. Sarpong played a lady who was waiting on a large inheritance that was mostly in gold from her dad's estate in Ghana, because whose dad wouldn't have their assets mostly in gold. We'll call this guy scammer victim number 2, or number 2 for short. Sarpong told number 2 an attorney named Mumani Muhammad was helping her get her inheritance to the US, but she needed funds in order to cover the court costs, airway bills, document fees, export fees, and taxes. She's now rich, but she just didn't have the cash on hand. Their scam is just a spin-off of the Nigerian prince scam, right? Muhammad had instructed number 2 to wire the money to Sarpong, who Muhammad would refer to as one of his sons in New Jersey. And when number 2 asked why his son had a different last name, he would just make up a different lie. You would think these scammers would be extremely careful, but they're really not. They make up a lot of sophisticated sounding lies, but they still make mistakes on the fly. But what helps them also is just the little glimmer of hope for love and money from the victim. Muhammad ended up making up the excuse that Sarpong was someone who used to work for him and that he misspoke. This guy still sent the money anyway. All for the hope of even more money coming back, along with getting to help someone who he thinks is a real woman. Number 2 eventually wired a little over $300,000 to Sarpong and his team. Of the roughly $2.1 million that they were able to scam out of people, about 40% went to Sarpong, and the remaining money went to the rest of the team. So what did Sarpong do with his portion? If you check out Sarpong's Instagram, he was definitely desperate for attention. You can just tell that he wanted the world to know that he was living it up. He craved that validation of a successful businessman. Funny thing is that no one really paid attention. None of his posts have that many likes. Ultimately, he did these scams and made some money. Instead of saving the money and trying not to get caught, here he was blowing the money on random frivolous things and posting it online. It's like he almost wanted to get caught. Investigators eventually caught on to Sarpong and his team. They said that he was the ringleader of the international operation that scammed over 30 women. He was charged in federal court with just a single count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. And he was the only one actually charged because everyone else was international. Here's the craziest thing. He actually asked a judge to assign him to a public defender. Why? Because he claimed he didn't have enough money to pay for a lawyer. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comment section whether or not there's ever a circumstance to send money to someone you've never met in real life.